First story, Lights Over the Rice Field, China, 1995. It was an ordinary morning, or at least that's what I thought when I started my day. I was working in the rice fields outside my village in Hechi, just like I had every other day for as long as I could remember. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth, and the only sounds were the buzzing of cicadas and the occasional rustling of wind through the stalks. I remember wiping the sweat from my forehead and glancing at the sun. It was still early, but the heat was already pressing down. That's when I noticed it, an odd, shimmering reflection in the distance, just above the tree line. At first, I thought it was the sunlight bouncing off something metallic, but there was nothing out there that could explain it. No cars, no water to reflect the light, just trees and fields. The light wasn't stationary either. It seemed to pulse almost, like it was breathing. My gut told me something was wrong, but I couldn't look away. I should have turned and run back to the village right then, but curiosity held me there, frozen in place. The next thing I knew, the light started moving, closer and faster than I could have imagined. It didn't make a sound, which made it all the more unsettling. 1 second it was hovering above the trees, and the next it was right above me, casting everything around me in this eerie, white glow. It wasn't like sunlight or any kind of light I'd ever seen. It didn't hurt my eyes, but it felt heavy, almost like it was pressing down on me. I dropped the sickle I'd been holding and tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like something had locked every muscle in place. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I couldn't do anything except stare up at the object. It was massive, circular, with a surface that seemed alive, shifting and rippling like liquid metal. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was it some kind of military experiment? A new type of aircraft? But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't something from Earth. As I stood there, completely helpless, a beam of light shot down from the object and enveloped me. It was cold, so cold that it felt like it was slicing through my skin. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Everything around me disappeared, the field, the trees, the sun, all of it swallowed by that blinding, freezing light. And then, just as suddenly, the world shifted. It wasn't like I blacked out. It was more like being yanked out of one place and shoved into another. When my vision cleared, I was no longer in the field. I was in a room, if you could even call it that. The walls were smooth and silvery, curving seamlessly into one another with no edges or corners. The air smelled sterile, like metal and electricity. I was lying on a flat surface that felt soft but had no give, like it was designed to hold me, perfectly in place. My body was still paralyzed, but I could move my eyes, and I noticed figures, 3 of them, standing around me. They weren't human. They were taller, thinner, with skin that seemed to glow faintly under the dim light. Their eyes were black and endless, like they could see right through me. That's when the real terror set in. I couldn't tell if they were communicating with each other or just observing me. They didn't have mouths, at least not in the way we do. But I felt this overwhelming sensation in my head, like whispers. Too faint to make out, but impossible to ignore. It wasn't just noise. It was invasive, probing, like they were rifling through my thoughts without permission. My chest tightened, and I could feel my breath coming in shallow gasps. My mind was screaming for me to wake up, to move, to do something. But my body remained frozen. One of them moved closer, its movements unnervingly smooth and deliberate, and placed what looked like a long, thin instrument near my temple. The cold touch of it sent a shockwave through my skull, and in that moment, it was like every memory I'd ever had was being replayed at once, fast-forwarding and rewinding in no particular order. I saw flashes of my childhood, my family, moments I'd long forgotten. It was like they were dissecting me, but not physically, mentally, emotionally. Then, the physical pain began. I don't know how else to describe it except to say it felt like my body was being unraveled thread by thread, even though I couldn't see anything happening. My skin burned, my bones ached, and every nerve in my body felt like it was on fire. They weren't cutting into me, but it felt worse than any blade ever could. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that the pain wasn't real, but every sensation was too vivid to dismiss. I could see their glowing eyes watching me, unblinking, as if they were studying my reaction. I realized then that they weren't just experimenting, they were learning. About me, about us. My body betrayed me further when my vision blurred, with tears, and I couldn't even wipe them away. I was completely at their mercy, and they knew it. Whatever they were doing wasn't random. There was a precision to it, a cold, calculated purpose that made me feel less than human, like a specimen on a slide. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The pain vanished, and the whispers in my head faded to silence. My body still wouldn't move, but I was acutely aware of everything around me. The figures backed away slightly, almost in unison, and the one holding the instrument near my temple withdrew it. For a moment I thought they were done with me, but then the surface beneath me began to change. It shifted like liquid hardening into something solid, and before I could process what was happening, the room itself seemed to dissolve. The silvery walls melted away, replaced by an infinite blackness dotted with pinpricks of light. It was as if I were floating in the middle of the universe, completely exposed. I couldn't feel my body anymore. No weight, no cold, no heat. Just this overwhelming sense of being utterly insignificant. The stars stretched endlessly in every direction, and for the first time in my life I understood what true isolation felt like. I thought I might be stuck there forever, drifting in that void, but then I felt a sudden pull, like gravity reasserting itself. The pull grew stronger, and before I could make sense of it, I was falling, fast and hard. The stars around me blurred, replaced by flashes of light and shadow. My stomach twisted like I was being yanked through a tunnel at impossible speed. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I hit the ground. Or at least, that's what it felt like. The impact wasn't physical, but it knocked the air out of me, leaving me gasping. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the rice field. The sun was still in the sky, the cicadas still buzzing, as if no time had passed at all. But something was wrong. Everything felt wrong. My limbs were heavy, my head was pounding, and my entire body ached, like I'd been through a battle I couldn't remember. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled beneath me, and I collapsed into the dirt. My heart was racing, my hands trembling as I looked around, trying to ground myself. The field was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. The sickle I'd dropped earlier was gone. Panic set in as I scanned the area, desperate for any sign of what had just happened. Was it real? Was I losing my mind? My hands dug into the soil, and that's when I noticed something. Tiny, perfectly circular imprints burned into the ground around me. They were faint, like they'd been made by something impossibly hot but delicate. My fingers traced the edges of one, and I felt a jolt, like static electricity snapping through my hand. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't need more proof. I knew it wasn't a dream. But that realization only made things worse. If it wasn't a dream, then what was it? I looked up at the sky, half expecting to see the object hovering there, but it was gone. The light, the figures, the room. It had all vanished as quickly as it came. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Even in the broad daylight, with the sun beating down on me. I felt like I was being watched. I forced myself to stand, every muscle in my body screaming in protest, and stumbled back toward the village. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had happened, trying to find some kind of logic in it, but there was none. How could I explain what I'd seen, what I'd felt? By the time I reached the edge of the village, my legs were shaking so badly that I had to lean against a tree to keep from collapsing again. A few people saw me and rushed over, their faces full of concern. They asked me what had happened, why I looked so pale, why I was covered in dirt, but I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. How could I? Who would believe me? I just shook my head and muttered something about feeling dizzy. They brought me water and helped me to my feet, but their kindness only made me feel worse. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them that something was out there, something that didn't belong in this world, but the words wouldn't come. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, or what I could only assume were faces, staring down at me. Those black, endless eyes were burned into my mind, haunting me in the dark. My body still ached, but it was nothing compared to the weight pressing on my chest. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in my own head, unable to escape the memories. I kept replaying the moment I was taken, trying to make sense of it, but the more I thought about it, the more questions I had. How did they find me? Why me? And what had they done to me? I ran my fingers over my skin, half expecting to find scars or marks, but there was nothing, at least nothing visible. But I felt different. It's hard to explain, but it was like my body wasn't entirely mine anymore. I felt disconnected, like a stranger in my own skin. At some point in the night, I got up and walked to the small mirror in my room. I don't even know what I was looking for. Answers, maybe, or proof that I wasn't losing my mind. But what I saw made my stomach drop. My reflection looked normal at first, but as I stared, I noticed something. My pupils, they were bigger than usual, so much so that they nearly swallowed the brown of my irises. I leaned in closer, my breath fogging up the glass, and for a second I swore they looked darker, almost black. I blinked and stepped back, my heart pounding. Maybe it was the dim light playing tricks on me, or maybe I was just overtired. But deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something they'd done to me. I splashed water on my face and tried to calm down, but it didn't help. I felt like I was falling apart, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The days that followed weren't any better. I tried to go back to my routine, to pretend like everything was normal, but it wasn't. Every little noise made me jump, and every shadow felt like it was watching me. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything other than what had happened. My family noticed, of course. They kept asking me if I was sick, if something was bothering me, but I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I? The village was small and people talked. If word got out that I thought I'd been abducted by something not human, I'd be a laughingstock. Or worse, they'd think I'd gone crazy. So I kept quiet, but the weight of it was crushing me. I started avoiding people, staying out of the fields, anything to keep from being alone where it could happen again. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that they weren't done with me. About a week after it happened, I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound outside my window. It was faint, almost like a low humming, but it was enough to jolt me awake. My heart immediately started racing, and I felt that same heavy, suffocating fear I'd felt in the field. I sat up in bed, straining to hear more, but the sound seemed to fade in and out, like it was coming from far away. I told myself it was just the wind, Or maybe some old machinery in the village, but deep down I knew better. I pulled the blanket up to my chest and sat there for what felt like hours, barely breathing, until the humming finally stopped. Even then I couldn't move. It was like my body knew something my mind didn't. I didn't sleep at all that night, and when morning came, I felt like a ghost of myself. Whatever shred of normalcy I'd managed to hold on to was slipping away. That same day I decided to go back to the spot in the rice field where it all happened. I don't know what I was looking for. Proof, maybe, or some kind of closure. The walk there felt like a funeral march, my legs heavy with dread. When I reached the field, everything looked normal at first glance. But the closer I got to the spot, the more uneasy I felt. The circular marks I'd seen before were still there, faint but unmistakable. I crouched down to examine them again, my fingers grazing the edges. They still gave off that strange static charge, like they were alive somehow. That's when I noticed something else, a faint metallic smell hanging in the air, sharp and unnatural. It wasn't there the first time, and it made my stomach turn. I stood up and looked around, half expecting to see the object hovering above me again, but the sky was empty. Still, the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I couldn't shake the sense that something was waiting, just out of sight. After that day, I stopped going to the fields altogether. I couldn't bring myself to be alone out there, not after everything that had happened. But even in the safety of my home, I couldn't escape the feeling that something had followed me back. Little things started happening. Objects in my house would be out of place. Lights would flicker for no reason. And there were moments when I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, only for it to vanish when I turned my head. My nights were restless, filled with strange dreams I couldn't fully remember but always left me waking up in a cold sweat. I started keeping a journal, trying to make sense of everything, but it didn't help. If anything, writing it down made it feel more real, and that terrified me. I felt like I was losing my mind, like my grip on reality was slipping. But the worst part, the part that still haunts me, is the feeling that they're not done with me. A few months later, I woke up one morning with no memory of the night before. That in itself wasn't unusual. I'd been struggling with insomnia and exhaustion ever since the abduction. But something was different this time. My body felt heavier, like I'd run a marathon in my sleep, and when I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face, I noticed a small, almost invisible mark on my wrist. It was perfectly circular, like the imprints I'd seen in the field, but smaller, almost like a pinprick. I froze, staring at it, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answers to. Had they come back? Had they done something else to me while I was unconscious? I tried to tell myself it was just a bug bite or some harmless injury I didn't remember getting, but I knew better. That mark wasn't random. It felt deliberate, like a signature, a reminder that they were still out there, watching me. Since then, I've lived in a constant state of fear. The feeling of being watched hasn't gone away no matter where I go. I've moved to a new village, left the fields behind, but it doesn't matter. The dreams keep coming, vivid and disjointed, filled with blinding lights and shadowy figures that feel too real to dismiss. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear that low humming sound outside my window again. Other times I'll wake up in a different position than I fell asleep, like I've been moved or carried. I've stopped talking to people about it. The few times I tried, they either looked at me like I was crazy or told me to pray. But I know prayer won't help. Whatever happened to me, whatever they did to me, isn't something that can be undone. I've come to accept that I'll never have answers. I'll never know why they chose me, what they were looking for, or what they might have left behind in me. Maybe that's the scariest part, not knowing. not being able to explain it. All I know is that I'm not the same person I was before. That day in the field. I don't think I ever will be. Sometimes when I look up at the stars, I feel a strange mix of terror and longing, like a part of me is still up there with them. And every now and then I catch myself wondering if they'll... Second story, 3 hours we'll never get back. Nova Delhi, India, 1992. I've been hesitant to talk about this, but it's something that keeps me up at night, even all these years later. It happened back in 1992, during a family trip from New Delhi to Agra. It was supposed to be a simple drive, just me, my wife, and our 2 kids. We were traveling through the night, the kind of dark that feels like it swallows everything whole. But that didn't bother me. I was used to late-night drives, but something about that night felt off, like the air was thick with anticipation. The road was nearly empty, save for the occasional truck. The quiet hum of the car was the only sound, until we noticed something strange. Up in the sky there were lights. At first I thought it was just a plane or helicopter, but then I realized that these lights weren't moving like any aircraft I'd ever seen. They darted, zigzagged, and even stopped completely in midair. We kept driving, trying to dismiss it, but the lights seemed to follow us, always staying in our line of sight. I remember feeling a chill run down my spine, and then my car, without warning, sputtered and died. The engine just shut off. That's when the lights grew closer, too close. They weren't up in the sky anymore. They were right there, just above the roof of the car. Everything around us lit up, brighter than I thought possible. My wife gripped my arm, and I could feel her pulse racing. The lights didn't make a sound, but the air felt electric, charged. I tried to start the car again, but nothing, not even a click. That's when it happened. I started to feel heavy. It wasn't like I couldn't move. It was more like I didn't want to. It was like something was holding me in place. My body went numb. Time? I couldn't even tell you what happened to it. It just stopped. Next thing I knew, the world around us had changed. The lights were gone, and the car engine had somehow come back to life, but everything was still wrong. I looked at the dashboard, and the clock was frozen at the same time it had been when we first saw the lights. 3 hours had passed, but no one in the car could remember any of it. It was like those 3 hours didn't exist. But we all felt it, the same strange weight in our chests. We couldn't talk about it at the time, not really. We didn't understand it. But that's when the nightmares started, and that's when the hypnosis came into play. Under hypnosis, my brother and my wife spoke of things I can't even fully explain. They said we were taken aboard something. Something that wasn't a plane or a helicopter. It was like nothing I've ever seen before. The beings, these tall, thin figures, with eyes that seemed to glow, their skin so smooth it reflected the light in a way that made it look like they were floating, not walking. They spoke to each other without words, their thoughts slipping directly into my brother's mind. Under hypnosis, my brother described the inside of the craft with a kind of cold clarity. He said it was metallic, shiny and unnervingly sterile. Everything seemed to glow in a way that made no sense. There were no visible windows, just walls of polished metal that seemed to stretch on forever. He couldn't make sense of how the space worked. It didn't feel like a ship at all. It felt like a place that wasn't supposed to exist. My wife also recalled being there, but her memories were more fragmented. She mentioned being laid down on some sort of table, surrounded by those same tall beings. They didn't touch her, not directly, but she felt an overwhelming sensation, as though they were probing her mind, searching for something. I still don't know what it was. She didn't remember pain, just an incredible feeling of coldness, like her very soul had been touched in a way no human could endure. The images she described, the machines they used, none of them were anything we could recognize. But it wasn't the machines that haunted us. It was the eyes of the beings. They were dark, vast, almost infinite. She said they didn't blink, not even once. It wasn't until later, when we talked about it, that the full scope of what happened started to sink in. My kids, they didn't remember much, just flashes, strange dreams, but they were scared. My daughter refused to sleep without a nightlight for weeks after. But my wife and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened to us that night was real. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a trick of the mind. Those beings, the ship, it was real. And it happened to us. I couldn't explain the coldness, the numbness in my body, or how the minutes and hours had just vanished. I've never felt anything like it, and neither had my wife. It didn't take long for us to find out that this wasn't the only case of its kind. We started hearing about similar experiences, odd abductions, strange lights in the sky. But the more we talked to people, the more I realized no one would ever believe us. Not fully. The memories we had, the details we recalled, they didn't line up with anything rational. But they were real. One thing I can't get out of my head is the way we felt afterward. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Like something deep inside us had changed, but not in a way that we could explain. My wife became distant, quiet. My brother couldn't stop thinking about the things he saw, the strange language, the way their thoughts felt like they were inside his head. And me? I tried to block it out. I tried to convince myself that we were just tired, that it was a trick of the mind, some collective hallucination brought on by stress. But it didn't work. The fear didn't go away. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes, those pale, distant figures. I could still feel their presence, like they were always watching, always waiting. My life was never the same after that night, and I can't explain why. We didn't talk about it for years, but I'll never forget the sound of my own voice cracking as I tried to tell my wife what I felt that night. That something else had been in the car with us, something that made the world feel like it was never going to be the same again. Over time, we all tried to go back to normal, but it was impossible. The events that night left scars deeper than any physical injury could. My brother became obsessed with trying to understand what had happened to us. He started reading everything he could find about UFOs, alien encounters, and strange disappearances. He even contacted a few experts, but they only gave him vague answers that only seemed to make things worse. Each time he'd come back from one of these meetings, he looked more and more like someone who had seen too much. We could all feel it, this weight that had settled over us. It was like something was always lurking just beyond our comprehension, something we weren't meant to understand. And those lights, their movements, the way they hovered so effortlessly, never stopped haunting my mind. I'd have flashes of memory, sometimes when I was driving late at night, just like that night. The engine would cut out, and for a split second, I'd expect to see those same lights hovering above me. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching, waiting for us to forget, to let our guard down. One of the strangest parts of the whole ordeal happened months later, when I started hearing about similar stories, strange encounters, sightings of bright lights in the sky, and even people who swore they'd been taken, just like us. It made me wonder if we were just one of many, or if our encounter had been something different. The way we were left with these strange memories, the way we lost time, it didn't fit the normal stories. Some of the people I spoke to were reluctant to share anything, but others seemed to know exactly what I was talking about, like they were waiting for someone to speak up. There was one guy, a truck driver, who told me that he had seen similar lights and that they'd followed him down a stretch of road in the middle of nowhere. He said the lights hovered above his truck and he felt like he was being pulled into them. He didn't know what happened after that. He couldn't remember. But I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear I had seen in my family's faces. It was a look of someone who had seen something they couldn't explain, something that went beyond human understanding. The worst part, though, came years after the incident. I've never fully processed what happened that night. I still can't explain the missing time, the way the car just stopped working, or how we all seemed to lose ourselves for those 3 hours. But the fear, that's still there. I don't know how to get rid of it. Whenever I'm in the car late at night, my heart races. When I look up at the sky, I sometimes catch myself searching for those same lights. I wish I could say that I've moved on, that I've found closure, but I haven't. I've learned to live with the fear, but I don't know if it'll ever truly go away. And the worst part is that I'll never have answers. What happened to us? Why us? What did they want? I may never know. All I know is that something was out there that night, something that's still out there. And I'll never forget the way it felt when those lights descended on us, the way time seemed to stop, the way I knew something was wrong even though I couldn't explain it. Maybe I never will. I've tried to keep it together over the years, but the memories still creep in at the worst times. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, the feeling comes back. The air grows colder, the room darker, and it feels like something is watching me. I try to shake it off, tell myself it's just my imagination, but deep down, I know what I felt that night. The pressure in the air, the unnatural stillness, it all rushes back. I've read stories from other people who have experienced similar things, and it's like we're all part of the same club, but no one knows what the hell is really going on. We're left with more questions than answers, and the worst part is that those questions don't go away. I can still remember the way my wife's face looked when she spoke about it. She said she felt like they knew everything about us, as if they had been watching us long before we ever saw the lights. I don't know if I believe that, but I can't shake the thought that we were just observed, that we weren't the first, and certainly wouldn't be the last. And then there's the after effects. It's been years, and it still affects my family. My wife and I talk about it less now, but there's a silent understanding between us that it's something we can never really get away from. It's like a shadow hanging over everything we do. My kids. They've grown up, but there are moments when I catch them staring at the sky, looking for something. It scares me. I can see the curiosity in their eyes, the same kind of curiosity I had when I was their age, before that night. I try to distract them, to give them a sense of normalcy, but I know it's there, that lingering doubt. I don't know what happened to us, and I don't know if I want to know. But it's like a part of me that I can never escape. It's buried deep inside, and I can't tell if it's something I'll carry for the rest of my life, or if it will eventually fade. But every time I close my eyes, every time I look up at the stars, the fear is still there. Maybe it's just that fear of the unknown. I don't have any proof of what happened that night, no way to show anyone that it wasn't just a bad dream, some strange collective hallucination. The only proof I have is what's left inside us, what's left in me. I've spent years trying to get over it, trying to move on. But every time I think I've put it to rest, something happens. A random memory will pop up, or I'll hear someone else's story, and it all comes rushing back. And I'll feel it again. The fear, the helplessness, the cold sensation of being powerless against something we don't understand. That's the thing about this experience. It doesn't just fade away. It's like it's a part of you now, embedded in your very being. I don't know if I'll ever get closure, but maybe I don't need it. Maybe it's something I'll have to live with. But whatever it was, whatever happened that night, it changed us. Forever. I've tried to live a normal life, but I know deep down that I'll never be the same. The fear has settled into my bones, a quiet anxiety that follows me wherever I go. Some days I'll be fine. I'll tell myself it's all in the past, that I've moved on. But then there are the nights when the stars look too bright, when the air feels too still. That's when it hits hardest. Sometimes I'll be driving, and I'll hear the engine sputter for just a moment, like it's about to die on me. My heart races. I can't help but look up at the sky. I don't want to see them again. But there's this nagging feeling that one day I will. I know that sounds crazy, but I can't help it. I saw what I saw, and no matter how hard I try to forget, it's always there. Every night it's like the lights are out there, just waiting, watching, waiting for me to look up again. I've considered telling more people, but I've kept it to myself for the most part. People don't understand. They think you're crazy, or that you've been watching too many sci-fi movies. But I know what happened to us. I know what I felt. And I know I'm not the only one. The few times I've opened up to someone about it, the look in their eyes says everything. I can tell they think I'm lying, or that I've made it all up. It's the same reaction we got when we first told our story, when we tried to explain what happened. The skeptics, the naysayers, they only push you further into isolation. But I can't let it go. I can't live with this in silence. I can't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, there are others out there who know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe they've seen the same lights, felt the same fear. I wonder if they too are living with the same weight, trying to forget, but unable to. And then there's the final question, the one I'll never have an answer for. Why us? Why did they pick us? We were just a family on a road trip, heading to Agra for a visit. Nothing special, nothing that should have attracted their attention. Yet there we were, caught in their path, taken into their strange, silent world. I still don't understand it. There's no logic to it, no sense that I can find. Maybe there's something about us that they wanted, something that we'll never fully understand. I've tried to make sense of it, but the more I think about it, the more it just doesn't add up. We were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe, as crazy as it sounds, we were exactly where they wanted us to be. I don't know. What I do know is that it changed us. We'll never be the same. And no matter how many years pass, I'll always feel that cold rush of fear whenever I remember that night. The night the lights came down. The night they took us. I can't explain it. I don't think anyone can. We were a family just trying to enjoy a night on the road, and now we're left with nothing but questions. Those lights, the eerie silence, the strange feeling of being watched. Everything that happened that night lingers with me. It's been years, and I still don't have answers. But maybe that's the worst part, knowing that whatever happened, it was beyond my control, beyond anyone's understanding. And the worst part, I don't think it'll ever end. They're still out there, watching, waiting. The fear is always there, lurking in the back of my mind, just waiting for the next encounter, the next moment when I'll see those lights again. Until then, I'll keep living, but I'll never forget. I'll never let myself forget. If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more spine-chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is pinned in the first comment, and even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Third story, A Warning from Beyond, South Korea 2005. I remember that night like it was yesterday. I was walking home after a long day at the university in Seoul. The streets were eerily empty, and it was that time of night when everything feels unnervingly quiet. The air was still, and there was a chill in the breeze. As I walked, my mind wandered, and the only thing that seemed to keep my attention was the soft sound of my footsteps echoing down the pavement. Then, I noticed it. Something that I can't quite explain even now. A strange, bright light above my head. It wasn't like the usual city lights or the headlights of a passing car. This light had a strange intensity to it, almost as if it was calling me. It felt out of place. I looked up, and before I could fully comprehend what was happening, everything froze. Time itself seemed to come to a halt. I couldn't move, but there was no panic. It wasn't fear, it was more like curiosity. I could feel my body being gently pulled upward, as if gravity itself had decided to let go. I was floating, weightless, and for a moment I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. The world below seemed so far away, as if I were drifting through space. When I came to, it was like nothing I had ever experienced before. I wasn't on the street anymore. I was in a place I can only describe as infinite. There was no horizon, no walls, no ceiling, just this pure, diffuse light that seemed to come from nowhere. Everything was white, and yet not harsh or blinding. The light was soft, almost comforting. But the most unsettling thing was the absence of any clear boundaries. I felt no ground beneath me, but somehow, I didn't feel as if I was floating, either. It was as though I had simply ceased to be part of the physical world. I looked around trying to make sense of my surroundings, but there was nothing to hold on to. No shape or form, just a vast expanse of white. That's when I saw them. 3 figures. At first, they didn't seem like anything extraordinary. They were humanoid, tall, around 180 meters or so. Their skin was pale, almost too pale, like they had never seen the sun. They didn't have hair, but their heads were large, almost too large for their bodies, and their eyes. Those eyes, dark and black, like endless voids that seemed to look right through me. They weren't frightening, but their presence was enough to send a shiver down my spine. I had no idea who or what they were, but I instinctively knew they were not human. There was no sound, no words spoken aloud. Yet somehow I understood them. They communicated with me not through speech, but directly into my mind. It wasn't like hearing a voice, more like knowing something, suddenly, without any effort. Their thoughts came to me clearly, almost as if they were feeding me information. They told me they were here to help humanity, that they had come from somewhere far away, beyond the stars, and their mission was to prevent us from making the same mistakes that had doomed their civilization. I don't know why, but I believed them completely. It wasn't just their words, it was the calmness in their presence. They showed me images, or rather, impressions, of a future where our world was torn apart by natural disasters and wars. I saw cities destroyed by floods, earthquakes, and fires, followed by scenes of conflict, violence, and despair. It was as if they were showing me the potential end of humanity. They didn't speak of it with fear or anger, but with a sense of urgency, as if they were trying to warn me, trying to show me what we could avoid. They didn't tell me exactly how to stop it, but they gave me a message of peace, of sustainability. They urged me to share it with others, to help humanity change its course before it was too late. But just as quickly as it all began, the images faded, and the figures were gone. The next thing I remember, I was back. I was standing on the same street, under the same streetlight that I had been walking past when everything first happened. But something felt off. I wasn't sure what time it was, but it felt like no time had passed at all. I looked around, trying to make sense of what had just occurred, but the world felt so normal, so unchanged, as if the bizarre events had never happened. It didn't make sense. I looked at my watch. 3 hours had passed. 3 hours. But in my mind it felt like just a few minutes, a few moments. There was no explanation for it. I tried to shake off the feeling that I had just been part of something huge, something that I couldn't quite grasp. But I couldn't. The images, the messages, everything was still fresh in my mind. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of dream, a weird, lucid moment of sleepwalking or something like that. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It was real. And the worst part? I had no idea what to do with the information they had given me. How could I share something so... I didn't tell anyone right away. At first, I thought it was better to keep it to myself. I mean, who would want to hear a story like that? I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had to share it. I needed to tell someone. I couldn't just keep it inside. So I told a few close friends, people I trusted. But instead of the understanding I had hoped for, I was met with ridicule. They laughed at me, made jokes, and told me I had probably just had too much stress from school. They couldn't see what I had seen, and they couldn't understand the gravity of it. It wasn't just some weird dream. It was a warning, and I felt like I had been chosen to carry that message, to share it with the world. But how? How do you tell people that you've been in the presence of beings from another world, that they gave you a message of peace and survival? It sounded insane, even to me. I began to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. But then, I would remember the calmness, the clarity, and the way they communicated with me. It was all too real. I kept the experience to myself for a while after that. It was easier that way. At least I didn't have to deal with the mocking and the disbelief. But the images, the faces of those beings, haunted me. They weren't scary in the traditional sense, but their eyes, those dark, unblinking eyes, they seemed to see through me, to understand things I couldn't even explain. The images they showed me kept coming back in my mind. The destruction, the chaos, the wars. It was like they were warning me, but also entrusting me with something important. I had to do something. But what? I had no answers, just a feeling of urgency, as if time was running out. I couldn't ignore it. I felt responsible, like I had been given this knowledge for a reason. But every time I thought about sharing it, the fear of being laughed at, the fear of sounding crazy, stopped me. And so, I kept it to myself, buried, deep within. But no matter how hard I tried to forget, I couldn't. The knowledge weighed on me. It felt like a burden. Weeks went by, and I tried to live my life as normally as possible. I kept my head down, focused on my studies, and avoided talking to anyone about what had happened. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was carrying something that I was never supposed to know. The images of the disaster, the dark eyes of those beings, always seemed to hover in the background of my thoughts. And no matter how hard I tried to push them away, they would always resurface, more vivid each time. I would have these moments where everything felt off. I couldn't explain it, but it was like the world around me wasn't as solid as it used to be. People's conversations would blur into the background, and I'd find myself lost in thought, thinking about the message they had given me. I knew the world wasn't going to change on its own. But then again, what was I supposed to do? How could I share such a bizarre, terrifying experience with anyone and expect them to take me seriously? Every time I thought I could speak up, I froze. My friend's laughter echoed in my mind, and I would retreat back into silence. The weight of what I knew felt unbearable. One night, it all came back to me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I was at home, alone, sitting in my room. The window was open, and I could hear the usual sounds of the city at night: distant traffic, the hum of street lights, and the occasional chatter of people passing by. It was just another ordinary night, but then I heard something that didn't belong. A sound, soft and distant, almost like a humming, but rhythmic. It was coming from outside my window. I froze. My heart began to race. I went to the window, cautiously, and peered out into the night. There was nothing unusual. No lights, no figures, just the empty street. But the humming continued, growing louder. It was a sound that seemed to pulse, as if it was coming from deep within the earth. I stepped back, my mind racing. Was it them? Were they coming back? I couldn't explain it, but there was something in that sound that felt familiar, like it was calling me. And for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flash of light in the distance, a single, bright beam cutting through the darkness. But just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't concentrate. I felt like I was on the edge of something, like the universe was trying to push me toward some inevitable event, but I couldn't see it clearly. I started to hear the humming more often, always at night, always just on the edge of my awareness. It was as though the world around me was shifting, and I was caught in the middle of it. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that I was just paranoid, that everything I had experienced was a result of stress or exhaustion. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. It was real. And somehow I was still connected to it. The figures, the message, the warning. They were all part of something bigger, something I couldn't fully comprehend. And every time I tried to move on, I was reminded that I couldn't. It was as if I had been marked, and I didn't know if it was for better or for worse. I began to wonder if I would ever be able to escape it. Would they return? Would they finish what they started? I couldn't say, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never be the same again. Over time, I stopped hearing the humming. It wasn't a sudden thing. More like it faded away slowly, until one night, I realized I hadn't heard it in weeks. It was almost like I had been waiting for something that would never come. Yet, even without the strange sounds or visions, I still felt that weight on my chest, that nagging sense of being watched. The world seemed normal on the surface, but there was always something just beneath it, some unexplainable undercurrent. I went through the motions of everyday life, but something in me had changed. I couldn't forget what I had experienced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the beings, whoever they were, hadn't left. Maybe they were still watching, or maybe they were just waiting for something. I couldn't tell. I tried to ignore it, to pretend it hadn't happened, but it always lingered in the back of my mind. I told myself it was over, that they wouldn't come back, that I had nothing left to worry about. But the truth was, I had no idea what to expect. Every night, before I went to bed, I would look up at the sky, half expecting to see that same strange light. But it never came. Life went on, and yet it didn't feel the same. The worst part is that I still feel like something is unresolved, as if I meant to do something with the knowledge they gave me, but I have no idea what it is. Maybe I've misunderstood their message. Maybe there's something I'm missing, something I haven't figured out yet, but I don't know what that is, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm running out of time. Whenever I think about it too much, I start to feel that same sense of calmness that I felt when I was with them. It's almost like they're still trying to communicate with me, but in a way I can't quite grasp. And then, just when I think I'm getting used to it, I feel the old fear creeping in. What if they do come back? What if I'm supposed to be part of something bigger than myself, but I'm too scared to face it? I still can't explain what happened to me, and every time I try, it feels like people look at me like I'm crazy. I haven't told anyone else about the experience since that first time. I've kept it to myself, but it's been eating at me, this feeling that I'm holding on to something that could change everything if I just knew what to do with it. The strangest thing happened a few weeks ago. I was walking home from school, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at ease. The night was calm, the air cool and crisp. I didn't think about the experience. I didn't think about the figures, the light, or the strange sensation of floating. I was just walking. It felt normal. But as I turned a corner, something caught my eye. A small flicker in the sky. At first I thought it was just a plane or a helicopter, but then it grew brighter. Brighter than any light I had seen before. I stopped in my tracks, staring up. It wasn't like the stars. It wasn't like anything I had seen in the city. It was so bright that it almost hurt to look at. For a split second, I thought I saw something move, something shifting in the light. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. Vanished. Like it had never been there at all. I felt a cold rush of dread sweep over me, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Was it them? Were they coming back? Or was it something else? The thought of seeing them again filled me with a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. It was like a part of me wanted to know the truth, but another part of me was terrified. Of what? I haven't seen any more lights since that night, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. It's like there's an invisible thread between me and whatever happened to me that night, between me and those beings. I don't know why they chose me, or why I was the one they communicated with, but I feel like they're still out there. I've tried to tell myself it's over, that I should move on and forget about it, but I can't. Not when the memory is so fresh, so vivid. I feel like I'm standing at the edge of something, but I don't know what's waiting for me on the other side. Sometimes I think about what they showed me, the disasters, the destruction, and I wonder if it's too late to change anything. Maybe we're already on that path, and I'm just too late to stop it. Or maybe, just maybe, I'm the one who's supposed to help prevent it. But how? How do I fulfill a responsibility that no one else believes? How do I share a message that seems so insane, so far-fetched? I have no answers, only questions. And I'm starting to wonder if I ever will. In a way, I feel like I'm stuck. I've had this experience, this revelation, but I can't make sense of it. I've looked for answers, tried to find other people who have had similar experiences, but it's like no one truly understands what happened. Everyone I tell thinks I'm just some crazy kid who's read too many science fiction books. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I can't escape it. I don't know if the aliens are real, or if it was all just a dream, or if there's something bigger going on that none of us understand. But I do know one thing for sure. I'll never be the same again. Something changed in me that night. And even if I never get any answers, I can't forget what I saw. The strangest part of all of this is that, after everything, I still haven't told anyone the full story. I've only shared the bare minimum with a few people I trust. And each time, they look at me with doubt, with that, "You're just imagining things," look in their eyes. I wonder if it's because they're scared of the truth, or if they just don't want to believe. But deep down, I know what I saw. And the truth is, I don't even know how to deal with it anymore. It's as if I've been chosen for something, but I'm not ready for it. Maybe I'll never be. But no matter what, that night will always be with me. The figures, the light, the feeling of being in another world, it's all burned into my memory. and I don't think I'll ever be able to forget it. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened to me that night. The beings, the light, the message, they all feel so real, but at the same time they feel so distant, like they happened to someone else. Maybe I'll never get the answers I'm searching for. Maybe I'll never know why they came to me or what I'm supposed to do with what they told me. But one thing is for sure, I can't shake the feeling that something bigger is at play. Here, I don't know what that is, but I feel like I'm supposed to be a part of it. I don't know when or if they'll come back, but I know that I'll be waiting. And until then, I'll hold on to their message. The world needs to change. And somehow, I feel like I'm the only one who knows it. But how do you change the world when no one believes you? So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you have had a similar experience or have suggestions for future horror stories, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.